What if the very thing you're running from, your fear of being vulnerable, is the one thing that could change your life? We all want love, success, and connection. But how often do we hide behind perfection, afraid of being judged? In Daring Greatly, Brené Brown reveals a life-changing truth. The courage to be vulnerable is what unlocks everything we're searching for. If you've ever felt not enough, this video is for you. Let's dive into the powerful secrets of this book and discover how embracing vulnerability can transform our lives. Let's start with the introduction. Brené Brown takes us back to Theodore Roosevelt's Man in the Arena speech. She teaches us that true courage isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up and daring greatly, even in the face of fear and uncertainty. The message is clear. If you want to live a meaningful life, you must be willing to be seen, to step into the arena and take risks. It's not about being invulnerable. It's about being vulnerable, and through that vulnerability, finding strength. Now, moving into Chapter 1, Scarcity, looking inside our culture of never enough. Brown uncovers something we all feel but rarely talk about, that sense of never enough. Society tells us we need to be smarter, richer, thinner, more successful. This mindset creates a constant feeling of scarcity, leading to comparison, disconnection, and ultimately shame. The more we chase this illusion of enough, the further we move away from the things that truly matter: self-acceptance, real connection, and joy. Brown invites us to shift our mindset from scarcity to abundance. When we embrace the idea that we are enough, we create space for deeper connections and a life filled with fulfillment. In Chapter 2, Debunking the Vulnerability Myths, Brown confronts some of the most common misconceptions about vulnerability. We've all heard the phrase, vulnerability is weakness. But is that really true? Brown shatters this myth, showing us that vulnerability is actually the birthplace of courage, creativity, and meaningful connections. Without vulnerability, we cannot create, we cannot innovate, and we certainly cannot build deep relationships. When we embrace vulnerability, we unlock the ability to live authentically and tap into our true potential. Next, in Chapter 3, Understanding and Combating Shame, Brown dives into one of the most powerful emotions that blocks our vulnerability: shame. There's a big difference between guilt and shame. Guilt says, I did something bad, while shame says, I am bad. Guilt can drive us to change, but shame keeps us stuck. Brown explains that shame is the root of disconnection. It tells us we're unworthy of love and belonging. To combat this, she introduces the concept of shame resilience, which helps us recognize, address, and heal from shame. When we develop shame resilience, we open the door to vulnerability and the possibility of true, authentic relationships. Then in Chapter 4, The Vulnerability Armory, Brown discusses the ways we protect ourselves from vulnerability. We armor up with perfectionism, numbing behaviors, and constantly bracing for the worst. These armors may shield us from feeling vulnerable, but they also prevent us from fully engaging in life. Instead of embracing connection and joy, we build walls around our hearts. Brown challenges us to drop the armor and replace it with courage, compassion, and connection. Vulnerability isn't something to hide from. It's the key to living a richer, more meaningful life. In Chapter 5, Mind the Gap, Cultivating Change and Closing Disengagement, Brown shines a light on the gap between our values and how we actually live. Have you ever felt burnout, resentment, or dissatisfaction despite your best intentions? Brown explains that this disconnect happens when we don't align our values with our everyday actions. When we live out of sync with what we truly believe, we become disengaged. She offers actionable steps to close this gap by cultivating mindfulness and aligning our actions with our deepest values. This alignment brings us back to authenticity and fulfillment. Chapter 6. Disruptive Engagement. Daring to rehumanize education and work takes us into the spaces where many of us spend most of our time, our workplaces and schools. Brown reveals that these institutions often discourage vulnerability, creating environments where playing it safe is rewarded. But true creativity, innovation, and connection thrive when we allow ourselves to be human. Brown calls for a transformation in these spaces, urging us to rehumanize them by fostering cultures of vulnerability, empathy, and connection. When we do this, we create environments where people feel safe to show up as their true selves, and that's when the magic happens. Now, in Chapter 7, Wholehearted Parenting. Daring to be the adults we want our children to be, Brown shifts her focus to parenting. She encourages parents to lead by example, showing their children what it means to live with vulnerability and courage. Children don't just learn from what we say, they learn from what we do. If we want our kids to develop a healthy sense of self-worth and the courage to be themselves, we must model it for them. By embracing vulnerability, we create a home where children feel safe, loved, and empowered to pursue their dreams. Finally, in the closing thoughts of Daring Greatly, Brené Brown reminds us that embracing vulnerability isn't a one-time choice. It's a lifelong practice. It's about showing up every day, even when it's hard, and daring to be seen. Living wholeheartedly means being courageous, compassionate, and connected. It's about letting go of perfectionism, tearing down our emotional walls, and stepping into life with open hearts. When we embrace vulnerability, we open ourselves to a life filled with creativity, connection, and joy. So, what are you waiting for? It's time to stop hiding. Step into the arena of your life. Dare greatly. If you found these insights from Daring Greatly powerful and life-changing, imagine how much more you could discover by reading the full book. Brené Brown's words have the potential to completely transform the way you approach vulnerability, connection, and personal growth. If you're ready to dive deeper and truly embrace the courage to live wholeheartedly, make sure to grab your copy of Daring Greatly. You can find the link in the description below. Trust me, this book is an investment in yourself that you won't regret.